5th edition came out 10 years ago. I think with the new rule set coming out, it'd be interesting to do a retrospective on the past 10 years and see what are the most iconic builds of 5e to date. Now these builds are actually families of builds. They use a similar strategy to get the same effect. Needless to say, there are a ton of great builds out there that don't rely on these strategies. But I believe that these ones have withstood the test of time, and they belong in 5e's Build Hall of Fame. Now these builds are not numbered in any particular order, but we'll start right here, at number 5, the Cheese Grater. Now there are a slew of Cheese Grater builds out there, but they all have two things in common. The first is that they depend on the spell Spike Growth. This is a huge area of effect that creates spikes on the ground, and as people move across it, they'll take damage for every 5 feet movement across it. There's no attack roll, no saving throw, and even though it's kind of small damage, this can really easily build up through a lot of movement. The spell is really good just by itself, but when you combine it with strategies to push the enemies through it a lot, it becomes really crazy. See a link below for Treant Monk's way of breaking this wide open. The overall strategy is turn 1, you cast Spike Growth over the area, and then for the rest of the encounter, you just try to push the enemies across it as much as possible, attempting to grate them across. Ugh, sounds so gross. One of the most common ways of doing this is by building a grappler. And since Spike Growth is not dependent on any ability score, it's easy for us to focus on strength to do grappling builds. So then we can grapple them, drag them across back and forth, and attempt to boost our speed, even use our action to dash across. Other great ways of doing it would be Eldritch Blast to push and pull, or Swarmkeeper Ranger to move them across, the Crusher Feat, Way of Open Hand Monk to push, and there's plenty of more features that can do that as well. Just as one character by yourself, you can deal a ton of damage. But this build really encourages teamwork to help pull people across. And this build can deal multiple hundreds of damage to your enemies, and totally get around their high AC, their high saves, their legendary resistance, and their resistances and immunities. Because of all those things combined, it has earned its spot as one of the most iconic builds of all time. Iconic build number 4 is the Spirit Guardian. This encompasses all the builds that are focused around the Spirit Guardian spell. This is a 3rd level cleric spell and is very well loved. It's powerful when you get it at level 5, and it's powerful when you upcast it even at level 20. If you're unfamiliar with it, it creates a 15-foot aura around the user, and any enemy that enters it on a turn, or starts their turn there, will take 3d8 damage on a failed wisdom save, or half on a success. Also, in a strangely worded way, enemy movement is halved while within the aura. Also, you can upcast it to deal an additional 1d8 damage every spell level you increase it by. There are a few reasons that it's become so well loved. One is that it is not friendly fire, except for some nuance. 2 is that it deals nice damage, and that half damage on a save is really fantastic. Pack Tactics, I think, did a video about this. I'll link that below to show just how much that half on a save actually does. That control for half movement inside the area is actually really powerful, and has a big effect on the battlefield. Finally, this encourages some interesting forms of play where you can pull enemies or push enemies into the aura to deal additional damage to them. The spell, in fact, is so strong that several builds I've read even suggest casting Spirit Guardians and then dodging for the entire rest of the encounter. But that's a little boring. The more interesting builds have things like the Telekinetic Feat to pull an enemy into it. They then take that additional damage when they enter, and then on their turn they take that damage again because they start in it. Or a lot of other things like Grasp of Hadar, or you can encourage team play to grab them in as well. Although it's built around just one spell, the love this community has for it is so strong, and the fact that you can have it for almost your entire career, I think those two combined have earned it its spot in one of the most iconic 5e builds of all time. Number 3 is the Forcelance. Oh boy, is this a good one. It was first introduced to the community by Ronin, and Treant Monk shared that in a video, which is where I first learned about it. It uses an interesting combination of rules that allow you to do really cool and different unique strategies. It works like this. A character is going to take 2 feats. The first one is Polearm Master. The important part of the feat is that when an enemy enters the reach of your weapon, which is typically 10 feet with a polearm, you can then trigger an opportunity attack against them. This is paired with the Warcaster feat, which lets you use a spell instead of an attack when you take an opportunity attack. This means when an enemy gets within 10 feet of us, we can then trigger an opportunity attack to cast a cantrip. The cantrip we're going to use is Eldritch Blast. Eldritch Blast is the best damaging cantrip in the game, but it has interesting ways to add to it, such as Repelling Blast. Repelling Blast, when you hit an enemy with an Eldritch Blast, it pushes them back 10 feet. And remember, Eldritch Blast gets more attacks as you level up. So at level 5, you'll have 2 Eldritch Blasts, which means you can potentially push them back 20 feet. So when an enemy wants to approach us, they will trigger an opportunity attack, which then we will deal damage, but also push them back much further away. And hopefully they can't reach us, or they have to use their dash action to reach us, which then wastes their action. This build uses our reaction in such a fun way, and it feels really unique to do in combat. You really care about your positioning and the way that you strategize. If you combine this with the previous build, Spirit Guardians, it becomes almost impossible to reach your character because their movement is halved when they enter. There are lots of cool variants on this build. One of them is a Ghost Lance, which I believe Pack Tactics brought up. I'll put a video below. The Ghost Lance uses the fighter subclass Echo Knight, and that creates an echo, and when an enemy leaves a space adjacent to your echo, you can trigger an opportunity attack, which then you can use to blast them. The ways of combining this become really cool and unique. I've personally played a variant of this build, and it was really fun and really powerful. I love that. And remember, this is a strategy just built around your reaction, so then you can use your action to do whatever you want for the rest of your turn. So you can be a full-on attacker, or you can be built around just pure battlefield control, and this is a way to keep enemies away from you. It's up to you. But the interesting ways these rules interact, the extra damage it gets, the control it does, and also just the fun you have playing it, I believe that earns it a spot in one of the most iconic builds in all of 5e. Number 2 is one of the oldest and longest living builds in all of 5e, the Polar Master plus Sentinel build. This is kind of like a great wall that can stop enemies from moving beyond you. It's one of the first ways of getting a tank build up and online in 5e. This is before we came out with subclasses like Ancestral Guardian Barbarian or the Armor Artificer that can actually tank and redirect attacks to you in some sort of way. Before all that, this build was the way to go. Like I said before, Polar Master lets you take an opportunity attack when they are 10 feet away from you, if you have a reach weapon. That combined with the Sentinel feat, which lets you stop enemy movement when you do an opportunity attack against them. That means we are really effective at stopping enemies breaking through to our back line. So when an enemy charges us, they come within 10 feet, we can then attack them with our halberd or whatever we've got. We hit them, their speed is now 0, and unless they have ranged attacks or reach themselves, they can't use anything with their action. So we can effectively control them that way. And the next turn, we can just take a step back 5 feet and do it again. It's a really effective way to control the battlefield, and especially strong if you're fighting one really strong melee enemy. The downside is you can only really control one enemy because you only have one reaction, but also it's not effective if they're not a melee enemy. But this combination has been an effective build since the start of 5e all the way through to now. It can tank for your team, you can also have a reliable damage use for your reaction every turn. You also have a good control of the battlefield. You can even prevent enemies from using their action at all. Because of all those things, and it has been so popular through all of 5e's existence, I believe it has earned its place in one of the most iconic builds of all time. And the last iconic 5e build we'll talk about is the Coffeelock. Oh boy, if you have never heard of the Coffeelock before, strap yourself in. Essentially, what it is you are a sorcerer and a warlock multi-class. Warlocks have something called a pact slot, which replenishes on a short rest. Sorcerers have an ability that you can convert spell slots into sorcery points, and sorcery points into spell slots. So essentially, the way this works is, as a warlock, you take a short rest, you regain your pact slots. These can then be converted into sorcery points, which then can be converted into normal spell slots. Those ones will not disappear on a short rest, and they will stay until your next long rest. The idea is that you never take long rests, you only take short rests. And then you can stock up and build up these spell slots for whenever you need them. For example, let's say your companions have a long rest. Instead of a long rest, you take 8 short rests. That means you can create a lot of low-level spells that you can use whenever you want for the rest of the day. The only problem is you can't take a long rest, or all those spell slots that you've built up are gone. So you probably need a lot of coffee to function. Hey, that's the name of the build! Using this strategy, you can easily get an additional 10 level 1 or 2 spell slots. That's a lot of webs or scorching rays throughout the day, whatever you want to do. Personally, I'd do Vortex Warp because it's the best spell. There are some ways you can get around any negative side effects from not resting, such as being a Warforged or something like that. And then you can go days and days of building up spells, if you have enough rest time to do that. Needless to say, this stretches the rules a little bit and feels a little slimy, but because of its eccentric nature and the cool ways that these interact, this has become one of the most infamous and well-known builds in all of 5e. So, it has earned its spot in one of the most iconic builds of all time. If I missed what you think is an iconic build of 5e, let me know in the comments below. I am a small channel and I guarantee I will reply to every comment that is posted in this video. Once I get my hands on the new rule set, I'll be doing deep dives into each class to run some numbers and see how much damage, control, and durability they have. I'll also compare that to what it was in 2014's version. And hopefully we can take a look and see where we sit. Hope to see you then.